Right now, I would just like to introduce to everyone to welcome Nik, who is the co-founder and CEO of Decentology, and he will take on to share with us for the next half an hour to share some ideas on innovation, hackathon success, best practices that you can adopt, and also some of the tips for security, user experience, performance, and optimization. So Nik, please.
All right, here we go. So hello, everybody. My name is Nik Kalyani, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Decentology. And for today's talk, I want to do something slightly different. I could demonstrate our product, but called DappStarter, but we have regular office hours, and my teammates, Morgan and Jacob, do a great job there of showing you some of the stuff. So what I wanted to do was take a step back for this morning's presentation and talk to you a little bit about two topics that I care deeply about. The first is innovation, and I want to share with you some techniques that will help you create an innovative solution for this hackathon. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about some best practices for decentralized applications. One of the big challenges with the blockchain ecosystem in general is that we create really great technology, but it remains fundamentally inaccessible to mainstream users because of the user experience. So I want to share some best practices that will help you improve the quality and the user experience of your application so that it becomes more accessible to mainstream users. So before I get going, a couple of things. I'm mostly going to divide my talk into these two parts, as indicated in the title: deliberate innovation and Dapp best practices. While I'm going through it, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A panel in Zoom. Please ask your question there. You can also ask it in chat, but it's a little easier for us to go through if you do it in the Q&A. And next, I will pause between the two segments to take any questions you have. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is I have 3 slides here which give you some context and about what our company Decentology does with an overview of our product. So let me show you that real quick. So our primary platform here is called DappStarter. And what it enables you to do is to very easily get started with Dapp development. So you can go to our website at dappstarter.decentology.com, and you can choose the blockchain. For this hackathon, you would choose Flow. You choose a foundation that you want to start building with. And then what DappStarter does is it generates the full stack source code for you in a brand new GitHub repository. So it generates the smart contract code, unit tests, a UI test harness so you can interact with your code immediately, and also a server-side API. And in addition, it does all the orchestration for you so that everything from starting up the emulator, generating test accounts, compiling your contracts, deploying them, compiling your client code, setting up a web server for you, and also all of that is set up to be hot loaded. So it makes it super simple for you to start your development. And we have IPFS integration also. So even that part is handled for you. So you can focus on your innovation. So you don't have to focus on figuring out which library goes where and how do you connect to a certain server and so on. All of that is automated for you. We like to think that 80% of the work is done and you can focus on the 20% value add of your application. So that's DappStarter for you. And please connect with Morgan in office hours if you want an in-depth demo or have more questions about it. So this is kind of the result of the UI harness that you get. So we automatically generate for all the transactions, etc., a great UI so you can immediately start testing it. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get to the heart of the topics for this morning. The title here is Deliberate Innovation. So I want to share with you 6 ideas for how you can create something really innovative for the hackathon. See, hackathons are an opportunity for you to think way outside the box. It is about innovation. It is about you pushing yourself and saying, well, there's a lot of these things that are done. How can I make it 10x better? Or how can I do something really, really interesting and innovative? And it's an opportunity for you to essentially think of it as a lab where you can experiment in a way that you don't normally get to do. And so with these techniques, it'll help you think of a great idea for your hackathon project submission. So the first suggestion I have is about combining ideas. So, when you look at many new innovations that occur in the world, it's oftentimes really two existing ideas, two or sometimes more, combined in a very novel way. And then you get something new and interesting. So you don't have to look for something brand new. Just look at what's existing and combine it. Let me give you an example. Prior to the era of smartphones, we didn't have such an amazing device. We didn't have a sophisticated computer in our pocket. What we did have is we had mobile phones, then we had music players with touchscreens, and we had computers. So now imagine combining all of those. You got a touchscreen, a computer, and a mobile phone. You put it all together and you have a smartphone. So that is innovation right there, but with three existing things. So look to combine existing things to come up with a new idea. And that is one way to come up with some really, really great ideas. All right. The next suggestion I have for you is to challenge assumptions. Very frequently, we just assume things are the way they are and you can't change them. And that's actually not a good assumption to make. We need to, especially for hackathons, we need to innovate and we need to question everything. So it's very important that you start looking at things from first principles and say, like, is it really necessary to do this the way it's being done? And usually the answer is, well, not necessarily. It could be done differently and could be done better. For example, many of you are probably approaching this hackathon with lots of ideas around NFTs, etc. But you're also probably thinking of those NFTs as mostly static, as images or video files, etc. But there is nothing that says that you cannot make your smart contract have those NFTs be dynamic. For example, you could have an NFT that changes over time. Maybe it impacts the presentation of it. Maybe you can have an NFT that can be fractionalized, where it's not one person who has to own it. It could be owned by multiple people simultaneously. So there's many different ways in which you can look at something as simple as an NFT and say, like, what is the kind of innovation I could add to it? You do not have to make it static. You do not have to make it a simple thing. It can be quite complex. You could even make it where the ownership of an NFT transitions through a group of people periodically. So there's lots of ways in which you can innovate in that space. All right. So the next idea I have for you is to restate the problem. So very often when you have a problem, the way you state the problem impacts the available solution domain. So if you simply restate the problem in different ways, it can open doors that you didn't even know existed. So this is a technique I use very frequently. I try and write down the problem I'm trying to solve, and then I rephrase it in multiple ways. I use synonyms, etc. And so it changes how my mind is approaching the problem. So I'll give you a simple example. Maybe you have a requirement in an application that there's multiple media files, but you can't store them as separate files. You need to store them together. And so the obvious solution there would be to compress them, right? Make a zip file or something. But then there is the added requirement that you also need to have a preview image for those multiple media files. So now it gets interesting. How do you do that? How do you create just one file where there's a preview image and also there's multiple media files? So, well, depending on how you restate the problem, you could just say that, well, the primary requirement is that you need to show a preview image and it's backed up with additional media files. Now, you simply flipped the statement, but in that, there came a solution. Why not use the preview image as a JPEG and take advantage of the fact that a JPEG photo is also a container? You can store additional media files in it. Of course, you would have to have your web server return only the specific part of the JPEG when it's requested, but that's a valid solution. So this is what I mean by restating the problem. You essentially redefine it, and new ways that you didn't even know existed just pop onto the surface. For example, many people don't know that a JPEG image can be a container. You can store videos in it. You can store additional images in it. You can store documents in it, etc. And you can push that envelope and do some amazing things. So that is restating the problem. All right. So the next idea I have for you is many, not one. You know, one of the hardest things is to come up with an idea. It is really, really challenging. But the way the human brain works, it's really quite easy to come up with many ideas. So when you are brainstorming or trying to come up with an idea, don't try and think of that one idea, that one awesome idea that is going to change the world and help you win the hackathon. Instead, just go and start writing down ideas, whatever. Don't judge yourself. Don't filter. Don't think this is crazy. Don't think this is impossible. Don't think this is too expensive, etc. Just let the ideas flow. And what you will find is that the way our minds work, when we remove those boundaries of, okay, you got to have that one best idea, our mind just goes crazy and comes up with really, really great ideas. And so what you do is you do that. And this is also good as a team exercise. When you just start blurting out ideas and writing them down, and don't censor anybody, don't judge anybody, just let it go. And what you will find is later, if you go through that list, there will be one of those ideas, or maybe a combination of ideas using an earlier tactic that really, really is amazing and will be your idea that you go with. So this is true just about any scenario in life, not just a hackathon. If you're trying to come up with one idea, don't come up with lots of ideas, and your one idea will be there somewhere. All right, so my next suggestion is something I call reverse thinking. So reverse thinking is when you are trying to solve a problem which seems hard to solve. So what you can do is, instead of thinking of how to solve that problem, you flip it. You instead approach it like, how can I make this problem worse? How can I make it so bad that it's just unusable? Once you do that, then what you can do is flip it again and take the opposite of that, and there lies your solution. So I'll give you a simple example here. In decentralized applications, there is a problem of gas costs. Now, we don't have much of that on Flow right now, but eventually, if you build for any other blockchain, or if you have a large transaction, there is going to be a significant gas cost, and the user has to deal with that. So how do you solve a problem like that? Well, one way to approach that is to figure out a way, is to think rather that what if the gas cost was just atrocious? What if it was $100 per transaction, or what if it was $1,000 per transaction? So that is extreme. That is something that no user would ever agree with. All right, so you've got the worst case scenario. Now flip it. What would the opposite of that be? Well, the opposite of that would be that the transaction would be completely free. So how can you make that happen? Think about that, and there lies your solution. So one way to do that is to consider that, for example, for this particular hackathon, Flow has a separate concept of a payer and a proposer. So what you could do is have the decentralized app, meaning your client application, actually pay the gas cost, and so it's free to the user. The user doesn't even need to know that there's a gas cost involved. So that's just a simple example, but this approach of taking something to the extreme and making it as horrible as possible, and then flipping that, will give you the best solution possible. And so you can start thinking about it that way. All right, so the next idea I have for you is about shifting context. So very often when we are trying to solve a problem or come up with an idea, we find it's difficult. But there's a good chance that that problem was already solved in another domain or another industry. So you can refer to that and then figure out how you can apply that to your domain or your industry to solve the problem. So let's work with an example here. So let's say that you're working to build an application that has NFT game assets, and you ideally want to make it so it's game neutral, so many people can build games using your engine, and those game assets should be tradable. Well, one of the challenges you have there is how do you ascribe value to the game assets between games? How do you know that the shield from one game can be traded with a sword from another game? Well, you don't, and you don't want it to be arbitrary. You want some consistency in the marketplace. So how do you solve that problem? Well, you can go look at DeFi, and you can look at apps like Uniswap, etc., that have solved that problem by sort of creating a model of liquidity provider. Could you apply that kind of model to solve the problem of figuring out what should be the conversion ratio between your shields and swords from two different games? Yeah, you could probably come up with a model for that. So this is what I mean by changing the domain or industry to observe how the problem is being solved elsewhere and apply it to your specific use case. All right, so those are the ideas. I actually think I glossed over one of them, which is many, not one. I actually talked about coming up with sort of many ideas. There's another example I wanted to give you is in the case of NFTs in particular. Since a lot of you are building NFTs for this, I wanted to share the idea that when it comes to sort of generative art, etc., one of the things you think about is what are the different domains, or what are the different styles of art you could generate. So you could have NFTs that, for example, decay over time, that grow over time. Can you mix art together to create a new NFT? Can you zoom into images? Can you pan them? Can you filter them? Can you pixelate them? Can you block them? So that is another example of many.1 that is kind of appropriate. So these are 6 different ways in which you can approach innovation to come up with a really, really good solution for your hackathon project. So I will now take a moment to look at the comments and see if there's any questions about these. All right, doesn't look like there are any questions yet, so that's great. All right, so what I'm going to do now is transition to the second part of my presentation, which is about decentralized applications, best practices. So all of you are about to build some sort of decentralized application for this hackathon. And what I wanted to share is 10 ideas or tips for how you can make sure that the user experience for your app is just amazing, just great, and really makes users happy to use the application that you create. All right, so the first aspect of apps that I want you to consider is waiting. So one of the problems with decentralized applications in particular is that, unlike Web 2 applications, where when the user clicks, there's almost an instantaneous response, we don't have that. Even if you have the fastest blockchain, it still might take a second or two before the user is able to get a response back. So depending on the transaction, depending on the speed of the blockchain, and depending on how many other transactions are currently waiting, it could take some time. So one of the things you want to do in your application is use any third-party APIs that are available to fetch sort of the estimated time and display that to the user. Give the user information about when their transaction is going to be completed. Most of us resort to having sort of a loading indicator, an infinite loading indicator, which sometimes is okay. But if the transaction continues to stretch on and is not completed, that can be very frustrating for the user, because they don't know if it's going to be completed in the next 5 seconds or the next 15 seconds or the next 50 seconds. So inform also the user that their transaction has been submitted, and they will be notified when it's complete, because users don't know that they can leave the page. They don't know, they fear that if they leave the page, their transaction will not work. They don't know about the intricacies of how blockchain transactions work to even know that it's okay for them to leave if the transaction is already been submitted and accepted into the pool. So it's very important you communicate this. All right, so the next tip is about impact. So one of the things about blockchain apps in particular is when there's a smart contract function and the user does something, it's quite possible that it might have other repercussions. It might change some value, it might change their they're standing within an application. It might lower some attribute that value, which might adversely affect them. So one of the things you ought to do in your application is forecast the impact of the action. And I'm not just talking about, oh, when you do this, you will have purchased an NFT, or you will have transferred funds or whatever. You need to, you are most familiar with your smart contract. You know what it's capable of doing. So look beyond the immediate and obvious action, which the user is obviously aware of, but help them understand what is going to be the action. What happens next? Will this turn something off for them? Will this cause their functionality will they lose functionality? Those kind of things. It's really important to do that kind, because in most cases, because of the irreversible nature of transactions, a user could do something and then be stuck. And you don't want that. You don't want unhappy users. You want to clearly communicate the impact to them so that they can cancel and go back if they need to. All right. The next thing is events. Now, this is a very, very underutilized capability in smart contracts. All smart contracts have the ability for you to generate events, but most developers don't take advantage of them. You can use those events and surface them in the client UI and allow the user to know what is happening. So the ideal thing you would do is have client-side notifications wired up. So regardless of where in the application the user is, if some prior action has completed or has some impact on their account or their environment, that a notification pops up and you let them know what's going on. So this comes back to sort of communication. Communication continues to be one of the sort of threads that runs through this. We just want to make sure that the user is well informed at any given time. And events are a great way to do that. So you definitely want to leverage that. Flow has events, and you can have those show up in your client-side application. The next attribute or next aspect that I want to talk about is cost. So users coming from Web 2.0 are not used to dealing with a cost when they click a button or perform an action. So you want to be clear and upfront about it. You want to let the user know what the cost of their action is going to be, and let them make a choice about whether they want to proceed with it or not. So this is not so much of a problem with Flow, but with other blockchains like Ethereum, especially with high gas costs, this is a problem. So in general, when you're building a Dapp, try and be empathetic to the user's need to know how much they're going to spend, and make sure that they have an upfront notification of that. All right, and the next term we're going to talk about is provenance. And I've been told that not many people are familiar with this term, so I'll kind of talk about it briefly. So provenance is really talking about sort of the source, tracking an object to its source. Where did it originate from? What was the history of it, etc. And so one of the things you want to do is, when your smart contract is working with user data, you want them to understand where data is coming from and also where it's going to go. So when there's an interaction and you tell the user, well, this widget is going to cost you $15, maybe you need to give some insight into why it's $15, or and is there a way for them to lower that cost, for example? Or if you're, for example, showing them that they currently do not have access to something, well, what is the root cause of them not having access to something? Can you tell them about why they don't have access to it, so they understand and might mitigate and change that? So that's what I mean when I talk about provenance. Show people sort of the origin of why they don't have access, or why something detrimental is currently in their environment, and help them see how they can fix it. Don't have them go looking for, how do I fix this? How do I change it so I can do something that I really want to do? Show them the way. The next item is addresses. So in blockchain, as we all know, working with transactions and addresses and private keys, etc., it is the norm to see long strings of hexadecimal values. But to users, this is completely alien. They are not used to that. They are used to seeing plain text. So one thing you want to do is don't ever display raw blockchain addresses anywhere in your UI. That is just very unfriendly and also intimidating for users. What you may want to do is instead just show the first few initial characters, because that's what the user is processing anyway. So I use 4 characters, but what's even better is give the opportunity to the user to sort of assign a human readable alias to it and use that instead. But in general, don't show long gibberish hexadecimal strings and things like that in the user interface. It's not pretty and it scares users. So that's a good tip to a good thing to avoid. All right, and the next item is history. So one of the things that in Web 2.0 apps that's done really well is things like breadcrumbs. Not only do you know exactly where in the app you are, but also how you got there. In a lot of cases, you can click a button and you can see how you got there. But because of the stateless nature of decentralized applications, like you literally refresh the page and whatever you're doing is gone. It's like they are single page applications typically. So users get really confused. How did I get here? What was the set of actions, or what path did I take to get here? So when you have a Dapp and you're displaying a particular view, you know why the user came to that view. You know what actions should have transpired. So show them to that user so that they understand how the particular view that they're looking at came into being. So this is an important thing. It helps the user have context so they're not lost and not frustrated by, how did I get here? How do I get back? How do I undo this? Or things like that. So showing, and you don't have to necessarily show it on screen, but give them sort of an icon or something that they can click on to reveal how they got there. And that is going to be a very useful thing for users. All right, so the next item is context. So as I was just explaining, with single page applications, you might, for example, have that application respond to a blockchain event and change state. So the user is looking, reading something, and all of a sudden the app changes state. And because it uses sort of React or any other such environment, there's no page refresh. It just kind of changes in front of their eyes. This is very, very confusing for the user and very scary in some cases, because if they might have been in the middle of doing a transaction or something like that. So clearly display a message whenever the context changes. Show the current context name prominently in every view so the user is aware that's there. If there is something dangerous that has happened, or if the transition state has caused to put the user into a sort of an environment where it's now a fault condition or something like that, change the color, make it prominent, and inform the user that something has changed. The worst thing you could do in your Dapp is that while the user is using the Dapp, all of a sudden, things change, like the buttons, the layout, etc., just change out of nowhere. What would be better there is to inform the user that, hey, the context has changed. Would you like to refresh the view? And let them click a button and then do that. And if they choose to cancel, let them know that they are working with stale information. So each step of the way, whatever the state is, it is your responsibility as a developer to inform the user about what is their context, what the impact is if they just continue working that context in case a new context is available, etc. All right, and then the next item is privacy. So as Dapp developers, one of the things you can do is build a hybrid app where you have some Web 2.0 concepts and you have the Web 3.0 blockchain concepts. One of the things that you could accidentally or even deliberately do is take some of that Web 2.0 data, which is user information, their name, their address, their city, their state, etc., and then store it on as part of a blockchain transaction, or store it on IPFS. That data is immutable. The user did not opt in to have their information on a public resource. Even IPFS is 100% public, like just knowing the hash makes it available. So, and now there are IPFS search engines also available that are constantly looking. And so it becomes super simple for people to get access to that data. So please, I implore you, make sure that anytime there is any kind of user identifiable information, do not store it in plain text on chain. In fact, do not store it at all. But if you absolutely have to, you must figure out how you can encrypt it and what keys you're going to use. Maybe it's a shared secret or something like that. But this is very, very important. One of the things that decentralized technology and Web3 brings to the masses is this freedom from sort of the marketing craziness and the marketing assault on our privacy that has been made by companies like Facebook, Google, etc. But if we build dApps which also violate the user's privacy, then we are no better. And that sort of crushes the dream of Web3 being about privacy and about your freedom of choice and things like that. So as developers, it is our responsibility to take the user's privacy very, very seriously and not store any kind of user identified information in plain text. And the last item I want to talk about is affordance. So this is a user experience word that really, in plain English, just means don't make me think. So when you're designing the Dapp as a developer, it seems a lot of things seem easy to you because you're familiar with concepts of blockchain, you're familiar with your app, you're familiar with how it works, etc. But anytime you create a UI or you create an experience where the user has to think, this is something that needs to be reworked. So please make affordance an important part of your Dapp. This is easy to do by having people who are not familiar with your app try and complete a task, try and complete a basic task and get some feedback from them about what were they thinking, how easy was it, etc. So affordance is the sum total of all the things I've talked about yet. Like, don't make the user think, make it super simple for them, and make it really, really, make them really excited about using your Dapp. Don't force them into complicated pathways, into complicated situations, etc. You make your Dapp a joy to use and it'll be successful. Happy users talk about the Dapp with other happy users, and that's how your app kind of grows. So those are all the tips I had for you today. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Nik Kalyani. I'm with Decentology. We are the technical partners for Flow for this hackathon, and we have office hours practically every day, well, at least a few times a week. We'd love for you to come to those office hours, ask lots of questions about Flow, about DappStarter, our product, and about this new platform we are building called the Hyperverse, which is an open platform for developers to build primitive blockchain constructs, which in the future will be used by other developers to wire them up like Lego blocks and rapidly build secure, scalable smart contract applications. So thank you so much for listening. I'm going to take a look and see if there's any questions. If not, have a wonderful day.